This lecture is titled Deconstructing Media, and the intent behind it is to equip you with the skills and understanding that you need in order to succeed in your final group assessment task, which is to create a news report on some aspect of the Ireland investigation. There is a depth that your tutors are looking for, not a superficial fun time, and there's real purpose behind why we're asking you to do this, and that's what this lecture will explore. One of the things that concerns me a little bit about what I see in primary schools and what I hear you talking about as well, which I probably have shared with you in class, but I'm going to have another go, is the perception that integrated studies isn't literacy or it isn't numeracy. I think the activity that we did in class in our last workshop demonstrates that numeracy can be an integral component of what an integrated studies unit is, and so integrated studies doesn't need to be confined to just the afternoon session once or twice a week. And I wanted to share with you the literacy objectives that you can cover by doing a project such as creating a news report with your students. And this slide and the next slide, where you can pause and read through those objectives, highlight the depth and scope of such a project on assessing learning objectives in your class. So here are some more of the literacy objectives at level 5 that match up with the level 6 ones on the previous slide. And even more. So you can pause and read through the extent of activities or learning outcomes that you can cover with such a project as you are about to embark upon. But it's not just literacy objectives. There are also ICT objectives that you can be covering. And again, you can pause and read through these. These are all taken straight out of Oswell's. I'm not making them up. And there are other areas of Oswell's, the often overlooked areas. The interpersonal development, excuse the typo, so you're working in teams, and the thinking skills, reasoning, process and inquiry. There's also thinking skills around creativity that I just ran out of room for on this particular slide. But just shows you that a good integrated studies unit will enable you to address a wide variety of learning outcomes from Oswell's. And these are where you can identify and use as the basis to craft your learning objectives. Okay, so to reiterate the instructions given in your face-to-face workshops last week, your task is to produce a 3 to 5 minute news report that follows the format of one of these programs. 3 minutes is the minimum, 5 minutes is the absolute maximum. So you can follow Today Tonight, which I hadn't realised had been axed in Melbourne this year, but there are still plenty of segments of this program available on YouTube at that particular address that you can use to emulate. The project, remember the humorous ones are sometimes harder to do than you think, but students have had a lot of fun with this one. The 7:30 report, have a look at the way that Lee Sales, who is the key anchor woman on this particular program, interviews her subjects. She is the toughest interviewer I have ever watched, and she goes for the jugular. She does not let her interviewee off the hook, something that those who are doing this particular format might wish to emulate. And good old 60 minutes, the ticking clock is absolutely mandatory, so is the crossed arms of Liz Hayes. And of course we couldn't forget a current affair on the 9 network. Where would we be without Tracy Grimshaw giving us the latest and greatest on those important current affairs shows like Where We Could Save 70% Off Our Shoes. And a new one for this year is The Roast. The Roast is broadcast on ABC2, a channel some of you may not be all that familiar with. And yes, these are all live to air television shows. Again, something with which many of you may not be all that familiar. The Roast is a parody, a political satire, and very funny at times. Sometimes they miss the mark, so an interesting program for you to look at. One of the things I didn't cover in our workshops this week is the idea that media is changing. There's still television being watched, and as most of you have demonstrated to me in class, watching live-to-air television isn't necessarily top of your list. But there are increasing numbers of people turning to alternative forms of media to access their news and current affairs and opinion. I know that my son rarely watches television, but he reads The Guardian online extensively and follows a number of other commentators to get his view, to get his access to news and current affairs. Blogs, online campaigns, YouTube videos, Twitter, Facebook, all sorts of alternative forms of conveying information are being accessed. And it's interesting because these other forms of media are not owned by the same people that tend to own our television and newspapers. So if you wish to create an online campaign instead of a video, you can email me or your tutor about a proposal. Okay, the next two slides should be refreshers and revision for all of you. You will have been introduced to the 4 roles of the reader through your literacy courses over the last few years, and I want you to refamiliarise yourself with the 4 roles. The code breaker is where I want you to start when it comes to your news report. You need to decode the codes and conventions of the news report that your team is using for your assignment. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those codes and conventions are in a couple of slides' time. But also I want you to look at the text user role, participant role, and particularly the text analyst role. How is that media report trying to position its viewers? For example, A Current Affair and Today Tonight, in my view, seem to want to make the viewer afraid. They generally want to make you suspicious. Or they want to deal with rather irrelevant things like 70% off your shoes prices. So analyse the point of view of the message that's being conveyed by your news report. Have a think about how the writer, and in this case the producer of those news segments, is influencing the reader perceptions, and think about the perceptions that you want your readers or your viewers to develop as a result of looking at your news report. What's the core message that you're trying to get them to take on board? How are you trying to make them think? That's a really key idea for your assignment. In order to produce media, we need to be media literate. We need to be able to analyse the messages that we are looking at on a daily basis, regardless of the format that media takes. So whether it's the current affairs programs, whether it's the newspapers we read, whether it's the blog sites we follow, whether it's the news feed on our Facebook pages and our Twitter feeds. You need to bring critical thinking skills to bear on all media. The first stage is to be aware of your own media consumption. Start making deliberate choices about the consumption of TV, games, what you look at on computers. I wish I could get rid of half of the suggested posts on my Facebook feed. They drive me nuts. Critically view what you are looking at. How is it being constructed? Look at what's not being included in the media reports that you're looking at. What aren't they including? A Current Affair, 60 Minutes, and Today Tonight are legendary for not providing a balanced view. The ABC programs, on the other hand, are required to provide a balanced view. Who's producing that particular media and why? What's the purpose behind that? Who is advantaged and disadvantaged by the messages that they're trying to convey? Let's have another look at the purpose. What's the purpose behind your news report? Are you entertaining us or are you informing us? Are you trying to persuade us to a particular viewpoint? Is that for political or commercial gains? Are you being educational? Are you trying to educate us about sustainability, for example? Is there a moral purpose behind the news report that you are going to be producing? These are really important ideas to consider and discuss within your teams or your groups before you start storyboarding. Try and work out what's the angle that you want to take with your news report. And yes, in this assignment, I've said you can be playful, and I said that you can be entertaining and engaging, but there still needs to be a purpose behind your particular news report. What are the values that you are implicitly or explicitly trying to communicate to us? And remember that media messages are not necessarily real, they're just a representation of some aspect of a real or imagined world. So take these sorts of things into consideration when you're in your teams this week planning your news report. We will be looking for these purposes as we assess your news report. Okay, so there are 5 key questions. Who created this message? What are the techniques that are being used to attract my attention? How might different people understand this message differently from me? What values, lifestyles, points of view are being represented in this message, and what are we leaving out and why? Why was this message sent? I want you to apply those questions to the 2 videos I want you to watch at the end of this particular podcast. Go back over these questions as you are viewing them. And then think about applying these questions to your own news report. It will help you plan a really strong assignment. So before you go any further, you can pause here and in another browser window, open this particular YouTube and watch it and answer those 5 questions. Once you've done that, then and only then move to the next part of this particular podcast. Time to watch an alternative representation of reality. Have a think about what this might mean.